Since the days of Angel Fire sites and LiveJournal, the internet has been flooded with misinformation about Visual Kei. This usually comes from disconnected foreign fans feeling the gaps of geography, language, and culture with their own loud, incorrect fantasies. One of the biggest misconceptions born from this echo chamber is the claim that Visual Kei is not a music genre, but just a movement. Understanding a genre's history and its musical tropes is not difficult. In fact, this is all just common sense here in Japan. Let's look at a simple, direct timeline of the genre's evolution. But before that, let me also preface this with that I know there are some artists within the scene who have stated that they do not view it as a genre, but also I've talked with them personally about how we both know that the 90s has a core sound and core tropes. Talking about genres, putting labels on art can be a tricky thing, but I'll be going through this with the lens of a composer, a freelance composer who works in multiple genres, so I have to study multiple tropes, and also as an active Visual Kei musician for years now. In the proto-era, bands like Dead End and Bucktick laid the groundwork and forged the path that others would follow. However, both bands have been very specific in stating that they are not Visual Kei, and that they predate the term entirely. It got to the point where Bucktick's drummer, Tolu Yagami, talked about personally going into record stores to physically move their CDs out of the VK section and back into the general Japanese rock section. They recognized they influenced what later took form, but they are absolutely adamant about being a separate entity that came before it. It was X that officially opened the door. The term itself carries over from Hide's previous band, Yokosuka Saver Tiger, who used the slogan, visual, loud, and cult. In X, this evolved into the tagline, psychedelic violence crime of visual shock, which later led to a music journalist officially coining the term Visual Kei. After that, Lunacy walked through that door. With their specific composition style and visual aesthetics, they set the ultimate blueprint for the genre's golden era. You can see their exact tropes copied by the vast majority of bands until that era faded out in the 2000s. The next important trope. Kuroyume's frontman Kiyoharu established a trademark heavy vibrato singing style that became the vocal foundation almost every golden era VK vocalist sought to imitate, as Hyde from Larkin Seal once perfectly summarized. If you take the playing style of Lunacy and put Kiyoharu's vocals over it, that is exactly what people call Visual Kei today. Then you have Malice Miser, who took the foundational tropes of the genre and expanded on them. They placed a massive emphasis on using scales like harmonic minor, even more so than X had on tracks like Rosa Payne, and delved deeply into synthesizers. This paved the way for the genre's outliers and gothic subgenres. If you want to hear the roots of that European gothic synth sound predating Malice Miser, look at the soundtrack for Hide's film, which goes even deeper into the aesthetic than Love Replica, a song he originally started putting together back in his Yokosuka Saver Tiger days. Again, these are all common sense facts that we musicians talk about and know over here in Japan. Of course, there are outliers in any genre, even in its golden era, but the exception to the rule does not negate the rule itself. I understand the psychological appeal for some fans, wanting to envision your hobby as something so deep and vague that only you understand. They treat Visual Kei as if it's some magical, untouchable concept, rather than a concrete musical category like rock or punk. It's exactly like talking to that one high school elitist who claims to know the true Norwegian black metal because he spends all his time absorbing the comments of isolated forum trolls who have never actually been a part of the scene. I've seen many people try to negate X Japan's position as the most important band at the start of the boom, citing obscure bands that the average person here has never even heard of, or claiming some non-VK band is somehow more responsible for the genre than the band that literally inspired its name. This is no different from that edgy punk kid trying to sound smart by denying the historical importance of the Misfits, the Ramones, or the Toy Dolls. Just as rock and roll evolved into something very different and multifaceted over the decades, the core tropes of its golden era remain the root of it all. The exact same can be said for Visual Kei or any genre that evolves over time. To claim that Visual Kei is not a genre, but only a movement, is categorically false. I've been doing this for a long time. I actually teach lessons to some younger Visual Kei guys who don't know past bands, but they want to know the musical tropes, so I teach them scales, theory, how to apply it to sound like Visual Kei, how there are tropes to drum beats, starting from X to things like Lunacy's Fate, or starting on the 4 like Rosier, going into it that way, up to the current era where the drum tropes are based on Furi and how the fans move, even though those bands generally don't listen to older Visual Kei. Visual Kei itself now has new tropes. These are all things that you can understand with your ears, regardless of how they dress, what language. You listen to it and you know it's Visual Kei, whether it's the golden era with its signature sound, or the current more metal-based, separate from the golden era, but more based on the movement of the fans. These are all quantifiable genre tropes that can be understood by musicians, and I understand non-musicians not getting that, but to say Visual Kei is not a genre and just a movement, again, it's false. It's both. It's a genre and also a movement that is evolving and changing. But just as rock and punk evolved, the evolution does not negate or destroy the genre's core tropes or its core era. I've been doing this for a long time, living over here. Been lucky to study under people from the golden era. Lucky enough to call some of them my friends. Been able to pay rent off of doing this for years now, which is pretty crazy. But if you want to believe some people off TikTok, that's cool. I mean, I used to believe some wacky stuff off of live journal and forums back in the day too, so I get it. Just been seeing people say that a few times, seeing people call female-fronted metal bands Visual Kei, or goth bands or shoegaze bands Visual Kei, when they don't even play in Visual Kei events. I get it. You guys are overseas, separate from what's going on over here, so you see Japanese and you see them in some cool outfits or dressed up a little gothic and you want to call it Visual Kei, I guess. But yeah, hope this made it easier for you to understand some of the tropes. Maybe you start studying instrument, studying scales, start listening a bit closer to the genre. That'd be cool. Hope you have a good day. Peace.